folks, I'm Tom Vasel, and welcome back to the history of the Dice Tower. Now, I know that the last couple episodes might be a bit more somber than people were expecting, and so if you're still with me, hooray! This will be a bit more cheerful of an episode. In fact, one of the big things that happened in 2011 was we finally figured out what was wrong with Clara. It was one of the reasons we had come back, and a doctor at Miami Children's Hospital figured out basically part of her brain, she had this rare disease, half of her brain was causing her just to go into seizures, and it was going to get worse and worse and worse and worse. And so they basically cut that half of the brain off, so she no longer has any seizures at all. However, it was as if she had a stroke then, because half her brain is gone. And she's still mentally disabled, which probably happened, as far as I can tell, when she first had the seizure way back when she was just a young child. But from that moment on, we knew what the problem was. The operation, Claire still is struggling with the after effects of that, but we're seeing her getting better and better and better as time goes by. So that was exciting, and that was good. And so 2011 brought a lot of changes to the Dice Tower, the biggest one being the Dice Tower Network. Now, on our podcast itself, we had many different contributors, and one of our longest-running contributors was Jeff Engelstein, who came on and talked about gameology and talked about using games and science and math and psychology, and it was a really cool thing, and I really liked it. And so he started up another podcast, and he was talking to Ryan Sturm, who he was doing the podcast with, and said, hey, maybe, Tom, we can make a network. And I was like, wow, man, network. I remember talking about a network. I had sat and considered, like the year before that, I had gone to Gen Con. I'd never been to Gen Con before. And when I went to Gen Con, I had sat down with Dirk Solko, who was one of the people in charge of Board Game Geek at the time, and said to him, maybe we could start a podcast network. And he said, we can, but if we do so, Board Game Geek will be in complete control. We'll control everything, and we'll be on our website, and you basically can just be one of the podcasts. And I was like, well, I'm not really sure I want to do that. And then when Jeff called me, he said, well, this would be called the Dice Tower Network. And I said, okay, I can see some benefits. The people in the Dice Tower Network, we work together, we push it, even though I've kind of poo-pooed networks publicly in the past. Can I still talk about them here? And so talking to Jeff, he convinced me to do this. And I said, all right, but we have like a few podcasts. We have my podcast. We have your podcast. We have the Dice Tower video podcast. We have a new How to Play podcast. But that's about it, But that didn't last very long. We quickly added the Little Metal Dog podcast, not just another gaming podcast. Ludology, the podcast that Ryan and Jeff started, and many, many more. I'm not going to mention them all as they join and come in and out. But the podcast network started strong, and at this point in time, I started saying, well, okay, the Dice Tower is just starting to grow and grow. This is kind of a really interesting thing to me. Where are we going to take this? How is the Dice Tower going to grow here? I was like, all right, it's my hobby, but maybe I could turn it into sort of a part-time job at some point. So let's put my full effort into it. And so I did so. I threw myself into the hobby. Now, part of this is because it's a way to deal with the grief after Jack died at the very beginning of 2011. So I said, all right, I'm going to pour myself into this. I lost a lot of weight too, spent a lot of time with my family. Just, said, let's just keep going. Let's move on as a Vasel family. And we went to TotalCon. Me and Eric were invited to a convention. I managed to work around, take some days off from school to go to this convention. I'd never done such a thing before. I'd only ever gone to Origins. And here we were special guests. This was the first time I was a special guest since Malaysia. And TotalCon was a lot of fun. It was a very small convention, but it was neat to go somewhere and have people come up and say, like, hey, how are you doing? And talk to me, and that was exciting. Also, I was able to, in March 2nd, 2011, I got Dice Tower Com. Now, I had started a website way back when, the Dice Tower, but I was only able to get thedicetower.com, which bugged me because I wanted dicetower.com, but some guy had it who just showed Dice Towers that he built. It was very, like, just a personal page, and it's like, well, I'll never get that. But it was up for sale, and I bid on it and won it, which was amazing. I was very pleased to have gotten that. I also designed my first board game at this point, out of the two that I designed. And so this was a Vicious Fishes, a small little game, and I didn't really push it very much. I remember, I think it was this year, I took it to it and showed it to some publishers, and I was like, it's an okay game. But it did get published by someone, and it sold, I think, a total of 40 copies. But there was that. Now, as this year went by, we started the Jack Vasel Memorial Fund. I talked about that last time. And I had success with Joe on the channel, and Eric doing 170-second reviews on the channel, and Melody. And I started to bring in more reviewers. I brought in Beth Hiley and the Chief, the Bart, and Ryan Metzler. Ryan Metzler was a big thing. He came on. I saw him do some comparisons of crokinole, and I emailed him and I said, hey, would you like to come on my channel? I really like what you did. And he said yes. I did not expect that he would turn into, he started with crokinole, but he would turn into a heavy Eurogame reviewer, and did a really good job at that and stayed with us for years. In fact, he's still doing reviews for us now. And so I was like, all right, now, how are we going to make the Dice Tower better? How are we going to make things cool here? Well, one of the things I added was a green screen. I got a green screen set up with lights and everything. I was recording in a small room in my house where it was extremely hot because I turned on these big outdoor lights. I didn't have these nice box lights here. You can see the corner of one there. I didn't have those at the time. I just had these big lights, and I thought the green screen, we could do funny things on it. You'll notice that we don't use the green screen much more. In fact, I made a video at the time of an inside look at the Dice Tower. Here's my stand, and then I have another soft light that I use for when I'm recording. And we'll show you how we set up a drop and how we do one. First we put that down. Then I built a frame. You can see then that we can take something and drop the whole thing into that, and it should work pretty well. Tell me that wasn't cool. And as you can see, things really changed from that point. We're in a very different place, but I had it was basically a garage that had been turned into a room, and that was where I was doing everything for the Dice Tower, in that place, spending time there with my kids. So we had the Dice Tower Network going strong. The Dice Tower podcast was doing well. When we went to Origins this year, I always remember that. It's probably my favorite Origins, maybe my favorite convention ever that year, the Origins of 2011, because a company called Mirthworks was starting up a computer game company, which computer games of board games. It didn't really go anywhere, but one of the companies they were working with was Clever Mojo, who I had known because of Alien Frontiers and their games. So they worked with them, and so they bought a block of 4 booths, essentially. So they had their booth. They gave me a booth, which I promoted the Dice Tower and the Jack Vasel Memorial Fund at. And then the Clever Mojo at the third one, and then one of the listeners of the Dice Tower said, I'm starting a board game company, or I've started a board game company. I'd like to be that 4th booth, and I'd like to be near you guys. And this person was Stephen Bonacor from the newly formed company Stronghold Games. And it was such a fun one. There was a lot of companies at that point who were not going to Origins. And I said to these companies, send me your games, and I'll show these games off there. So I remember we got Small World Underground, and we got some games from Fantasy Flight and other companies. We had raffles at the booth that were like spilling out all over the place. It was just an exciting con. We were there having a great time. We ran Wits and Wagers, and I'm like, yeah, we're back. This is how Origins is going to be. Maybe we'll get a booth in the future. This was a lot of fun having a booth. It was a lot of work, but we really did enjoy ourselves getting together and doing that. But I almost also got into trouble with that Origins, because what happened was at that Origins, they also announced the Origins for next year, which was not during the summer, but was during the end of May, which was during the school year. Not just during the school year, but like during graduations and stuff during the school year. Well, if you're a teacher, like I was at the time, you don't get out of the school to go to a convention, not during that time. And so a lot of people were upset about these date changes, and this was maybe the lowest attended Origins that following year that there was because of that. But I said, all right, we got to talk to these guys. So I went to the open board meeting of Gamma, and I met a lot of people there. I met John Ward, and when I said, does anyone here have anything to say about date changes? I was like, me. And so I gave my thing. They responded, turned into a bit of an argument. Not a big deal, but definitely John Ward knew who I was by the time we were done. And nothing happened. They didn't change the date or anything, but I had made up my mind. But because of this, a few weeks later, John Ward called me and said, hey, let's meet at Gen Con. I was like, oh, did he hear me talking about the Origins Awards? Because at the time, I was criticizing the Origins Awards pretty much all the time, as was everyone, because they were really awful. We met at Gen Con. He said, we'd like to get you guys involved next year at Origins and more to help promote the convention. And I wasn't able to go to the next Origins, actually, but I was able to go to one in 2 years, and we were able to do something there. We'll talk about that when I get to that part. So that actually turned out to be a good thing. Also at Origins, for the first time, I took Dice Tower custom dice. Again, I was saying, how can I promote the thing? When I first went to Origins, I had business cards. I was like, all right. The first time I went with Dice Tower, I remember saying business cards, putting them out. I walked in the elevator and said to someone, hey, you ever listen to Dice Tower? No, here's my card. And that person actually later on said they did listen to the Dice Tower because of that. And I put up magnets for the Dice Tower and things, but dice was really cool. People liked the dice, and it was something that I was spending money on to get these dice, but at the same time, the feedback that people gave on them, and I was like, we want to promote this. Also, at this time, after Origins was over, I decided to do the People's Choice Top 100, where I would let people vote on their top 100 games of all time. I said, no, let's not just do Tom Vasel's top 100. Let's do what everyone else thinks is the top 100 games, because I love these lists, and I found out that people also really like doing these lists during this time. We were continually adding podcasts to the network. One of the podcasts we added around this time was the Plaid Hat podcast. Now, this is the reason I mentioned this podcast is because the Plaid Hat was a publishing podcast. And we were not sure how that would go over well with people. Like, how much do we want to show that we're associated with publishers? Will people think that this has gone too far? And the line between reviewers and publishers? But in reality, I shouldn't have even worried about it. Sure, some people would say that, but the fact was they did a great podcast talking about the ins and outs of running a board game business. But it also started a lot of relationships started forming between us. Remember the Origins convention? I said we were by the Stronghold booth. We made good friends with him at that convention. I met the Arcane Wonders people for the first time at that convention and several other publishers who I knowed, and we started talking about how publishers and the Dice Tower could work together. I ran a Secret Santa that year for the Dice Tower. I decided to stop running the big one on Board Game Geek and run my own Secret Santa, so that was a kind of a specific thing for Dice Tower. Our Dice Tower Network got a little bit of a boost when we added a fledgling podcast, Shut Up and Sit Down, onto the show. Now, Shut Up and Sit Down has, a year later, they went and joined up with Penny Arcade briefly, which they had to leave our network to do that. And then when that Penny Arcade thing didn't work off, they went off on their own. But for a brief time, they were part of the Dice Tower Network. And I started designing another game. I went to Gen Con that year again, and I was enjoying Gen Con. And one of the people I met at Origins was Steve Avery. I know him from online things, and we had very similar tastes in games. And so when I decided to design another game, I emailed him and I said, I have this idea to take Kremlin and turn it into a game. And he said, I'll help you. And I said, great, but I don't really have a good plan. So I sent him my basis. I was sitting in a boring teaching meeting, and suddenly I was like, I got it. This is how the game's going to work. And I sent it to him, and he said, well, that's good and all, but this is better. And he sent me the framework for the beginning of what would turn out to be Nothing Personal. At this time, though, we were calling it Capo, or the Unnamed Mafia game. So we started working on that back and forth, and so I was doing that. We also ran our first Jack Vasel Memorial Fund auction on Board Game Geek, which was phenomenal. They always have been phenomenal, but this blew my mind. I was still, remember, this is all in 2011, so still thinking about the beginning of the year where Jack had passed away, and this was a big deal to me. And seeing people get excited about that, seeing people give money to help others was a really big encouragement to me. I was still getting emails and things about the Dice Tower, and I was still sitting there saying, I've got to change the Dice Tower from just being Tom Vasel. And I remember where there was arguments and people said, it is Tom Vasel, nothing you can do about that. And even today in 2018, some people will consider Dice Tower to be Tom Vasel, but it's not at this point. There are hundreds of people involved. And one of my goals has always been to get other people involved. I don't want the Dice Tower to be my face. Like even with these Dice Guys, you'll notice I'm having Dice Guys made of all different people on the show because I want it to be that way. And in 2011, as I'm going back and look at these things, I could see that I was pushing for that more. You know what else was big at this point in time? Kickstarter had shown up. I already knew about Kickstarter because of Alien Frontiers and working with Clever Mojo. Remember, we had a booth with them at Origins, and Kickstarter was starting to take off. I remember that there was a project that had broken 100,000, and people were like, what? And Jeff Engelson and other people were talking about the Kickstarter bubble. Was it going to pop? I think we can safely say that it didn't pop in the next 7 years, but maybe it will now. we also discussed advertising on the Dice Tower. We were saying, okay, I want to make the Dice Tower profitable but not irritate people too much. So do I have ads on YouTube? Do I have ads on the Dice Tower? I remember turning the ads on YouTube thinking, oh my, people are going to be really upset about this, and no one said anything. And I thought, okay, well, it's like, ooh, I made a penny a day or something, but hey, that adds up. I can take my kids out to eat once in a while. And having a few sponsorships on the Dice Tower. So as we ended 2011, we ended it like we always do with the best of the year and all that stuff. It was an interesting change because because Eric was now solidly the co-host of the show. Sam, as we had talked about, we had come back to America, and Sam had joined me in America. And I said to Eric, now this is weird because Sam and I are working in the same place. We were co-hosts, but now you join me. I don't want to say, well, see you later, Eric. What can I do? Well, so Sam started joining me for a series called Miami Dice. And we did our first one at the very beginning of 2011. I think March 21st was when we did the first review. And the Miami Dice review started turning out to be very popular, to see me and Sam go back together. And this was a way to get Sam involved into the YouTube side of things. So I had Eric as my co-host on the audio show. I had Sam as my co-host on the video show. I had Ryan Metzler and Bart and other people, Beth and those, doing video reviews. We were doing our top 100, the People's Choice top 100. And I said, wow, the Dice Tower has really come pretty far since we did it back in this time. More changes are coming, though, in 2012. We'll talk about that next time, though. Thanks for watching History of the Dice Tower. I'm Tom Vasel. See you next time.